Thank you for the introduction and for the welcome. I must just commend all of you here, particularly the leaders and the pioneers of this great movement. It's one thing to have business people in your church. It's another to find a way of being able to harness that power and potential towards changing the world. And so I'm really, really honored to be here. There's nowhere else that I'd rather be this morning, as cold and as chilly and as dark as it is right now. So I'm here, I'm going to be speaking about strategy. We had an interesting set of interactions between Jonathan Wilson and Jonathan Nell at the back, because they said, "Are you going to use slides?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. If that's what we're going to do, I'll use slides." And then I had a David moment. So as you know, David volunteers himself to go and take on the giant Goliath. And they say, "Well, that's fine. You need to put this on." And David kind of tries the bomb and says, "I'm not going to be able to win this." And so I put the slides together because I thought, well, that's what we do at Business Co. And then I actually thought that maybe I won't. So I may or may not. So let's see how it goes. But I think the important one is just, I think I'm here. You're not here to see my slides. You're here to at least for us to share in conversation. So what I'll be speaking about as I refer to the slides, it's now skipping beyond where I want it to be. This is why I shouldn't. That's one slide behind. So about 5 questions that I'd like us to touch on in the brief period of time that we have together. The first one is, what is strategy? And of course, the difficulty with this conversation is that I'm sure all of you have an opinion on strategy. I'm sure all of you have sat through some sort of a conversation on strategy. In fact, I have discovered that if you ever want anything to sound important, just put strategic in front of it. All of a sudden it has gained a level of importance. You know, it could be a plan, but if it's a strategic plan, it sounds a lot more important. It could be a framework, but if you call it a strategic framework, it could be a dialogue. But if it's a strategic dialogue, it sounds a lot more significant. And so it's a difficult thing to come and to start the conversation on what is strategy, because I know that you all already have notions on what strategy is. But I think it's important in creating a platform for the rest of the conversation for us just to touch a little bit on just what is strategy. And then let's talk about what it is to be redemptive. Now, you know, I think the speakers that have spoken before me on this platform have done a really great job of unpacking redemptiveness. So the purpose is not to do that, but it is to locate it within strategy. I was here for the Andy Crouch talk, and I thought that was amazing. So again, congratulations to all of you for that, and I think he unpacked it quite well. But what I'll be doing is seeking to locate the idea of redemptiveness in strategy, that locate strategy in redemptiveness. Then, why redemptive work requires strategy, and what is redemptive strategy? We'll touch on that. And then finally, I will share a few thoughts on why I believe we're losing. And who we is will become clearer as I speak. What losing means will become clearer as I speak. And more importantly, so how do we harness redemptive strategy in order to put ourselves on a trajectory towards where? So let's get the ball rolling. What is strategy? So this is where that particular slide comes into play. There we go. So what is strategy? So strategy comes from, or at least originates, the formalization of it, the coining of it as an idea comes from Greece, and it's in a particular period, particularly around the Peloponnesian War, when this idea of, sorry, are there any people of Greek descent in the room? Fantastic. Glad I'm about to butcher it, and I thought Chichepu was going to catch me out. So, around the period of the Peloponnesian War, this idea of strategos comes about. And what's happening around that period is that the idea of city-states comes into play. And what city-states were they were a way for people to start to organize themselves in a way that was most efficient for the utilization of resources. And so they organized themselves into these city-states, and all of a sudden these city-states starts to have conflict between them, primarily over resources, and eventually they start to fight, and then this role, or the need for this role, comes about, and it's the role of the strategos. And so strategy then derived from the word strategos, which means generalship. The role of strategy, or where strategy derives from, is from the idea of generalship, the army general, the one who leads us into battle. But let's be clear that the army general's job is not to lead his troops into battle. The army general's job is to win wars. There's an important distinction between considering your job as fighting battles versus considering your job as winning wars. And so strategy then is the art and the science of how we win wars. Now, I know that this may not be too PC to talk about war. Like, we're in church, why should we be being so violent and so on? But it's exactly that, and I think it touches on part of why I think we're losing, is that we fail to harness these things as instruments of war. We are at war. We are at war around a particular idea of how society should be and alternative ideas of how society is. It's a war. And unfortunately, our ideas aren't simply going to be taken up just because they're good ideas. We're going to have to contest and to fight for those wars. If you then go back into Greece, what you understand is that around that same period, the idea of politics comes into play. What is politics? Politics is about the collective interests of people. It is about the idea that the people and their will, and how you bring those together, how you advance them, how you articulate them, and how you make sure that the will of the people is not just articulated but comes into expression in their daily lives. So politics comes around that, and so what war becomes, and as some military thinkers have said over time, is that war is politics through different means. So, said differently, war is the advancement of political ideas through military means. War is the advancement of political ideas through military means. War is not about fighting. War is about advancing ideas. And this is important for the conversation that we're going to have, because I think that quite often we lose it when we think that it's just about fighting or it's just about business. It's actually about the advancement of an idea. So we have particular ideas as believers, or as people who believe in the idea of redemptiveness. We have particular ideas about how we should be raising our families, particular ideas about how resources within an economy should be shared. We have particular ideas about how people should be treated and how different groups of people should be treated. The problem comes in when those ideas start to clash with alternative ideas. And when those ideas start to clash, then what then ensues is a contestation around which ideas are going to dominate. So strategy is about the ability to advance the dominance of particular ideas. And this is where then the idea of trend comes in, because political ideas are all about making sure that you enforce a particular trend in the ways or in the affairs of people's lives. Political ideas and why people go out to fight for political ideas is not that it changes every single day. It's that we're going to decide on whether it's okay to kill people randomly. And the purpose then of war is to make sure that the dominant idea comes to be translated and effected in everyday life. So strategy, importantly, is about the translation of ideas and making sure that ideas come into effect. And it's always a matter of which the dominant idea gets to decide how we live our lives. So when we then speak about redemptiveness, we're speaking about a particular idea. We've got a particular idea, but there's a problem with that idea. It's not dominant. It's not the dominant idea. If it was, then we would all look outside and see a redeemed world. So it's not a dominant idea. There are alternative ideas out there that are more dominant. And we've got two options. We could just settle for it. There's always an option. Let's just agree that those are all the ideas that they can be dominant. Or we can fight for the dominance of this idea of redemption. And the moment we then decide we are going to fight for the dominance of this idea of redemption, then that's where we invoke this idea of strategy. And so I say all of this because I want us to understand that when we speak about strategy, it's not, these contemporary notions of strategy will suggest that it's about bringing out a particular framework, being clear about where we want to get to, be clear about the actions that we're going to undertake, and then going out and executing. Those tend to be the contemporary notions of strategy. But where strategy actually derives is that we need to have a particular idea of great potency, and we need to be willing to go out to fight for it. Because if we don't fight for it, alternative ideas will dominate. And when alternative ideas dominate, they shape the pattern of life of the people that live under those ideas. And so, redemptiveness is an idea. Redemptiveness is an idea. It's not a popular one, but it's an idea. It's an idea that's fading out there. And if we're going to change it and change its fate in the world, then we're going to need strategy. So this all sounds highly theoretical, but let's go to one of the earliest known or recorded strategic planning sessions, and let's see how that unfolds. Once upon a time, somewhere in the Middle East, as recorded in a book called the Bible, around the chapter of Exodus 3, a strategic planning session ensues between a man called Moses and God. Not around a boardroom table, around a dirty bush. Now, what God, there's this fugitive who's gone back into hiding. He comes into the world and is hidden. And so his safe place is when in trouble he goes into hiding. So he's in hiding. God finds him. And God says to him, and I want to just read it out. God says to him, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I've also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing. Come now therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So God approaches Moses with a plan for a redemptive mission. My people are under oppression, and I want you to go there. But the story actually doesn't start there. The story actually starts somewhere in Genesis. I think it's Genesis chapter 17. The story starts with a promise that God makes to Abraham. And God makes a promise to Abraham and said, you'll be a father of nations. You'll be the father of nations. You will have many descendants. That's where the story starts. It starts with a promise, not with an itch for war, not with some expansionist ideas about, oh no, you just want to grow big. Not with, we're on 10% market share, we need to go to 50%. It starts with a promise from God. It's vision. And that idea is that you're going to be a father of many nations, and you're going to have many descendants. Why does the burning bush moment happen? It doesn't happen because the Israelites are being oppressed, contrary to popular belief. It doesn't. If you read the Bible, you realize that it took a while for God to spring into action. The Egyptians, first of all, they were having a good time in Egypt. They were having an amazing time. The new king comes in and then starts to make their lives more and more difficult. God does nothing. More and more difficult. God does nothing. At which point does God intervene? He intervenes at the point where they want to kill the seed bearers. At the point where the promise comes under threat. At the point at which this idea comes under threat. Even more fundamentally, at the point at which there's a risk that God might be perceived to be a lie. At that point is when he sets up the burning bush composite. Again, not for some expansionist ideal, but because there's an idea, there's a promise that needs to be preserved. And it is only at that point. Now, let's be clear about what seed bearers are. Seed bearers are not simply just, well, there you go, you don't have children. They are the ones that determine the future trend of the nation of Israel and the trend that is going to be pursued or followed as far as the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. At that point, God sets this conversation up. Because there's an idea, there's a promise under threat. And while I could possibly, withstand a few more lashings, harder work, and while my people even prosper in spite of those challenges, where I call full stop on it is at the point where it puts my promises to threat. And at that point, the strategic conversation comes to life. So we'll come back to that story. But I'd like to leave you, or I'd like to post this as an idea, is that the role of leadership is to shape and to shift long-term trends. The function of leadership is to shape and to shift long-term trends. What God was concerned about in that moment was not that his people are getting a few lashings. God was concerned about the shape of the long-term trend as far as his promise is concerned. So if the role of leadership is to shape and to shift the long-term trends, then the function of strategy is to determine how to win at doing so within the context of contestation and constraint. That's what strategy ultimately is. When you were appointed in whatever leadership role that you occupy, I imagine that you weren't appointed so that you could sustain anything. There was a particular trend that your shareholders and or your stakeholders, there was a particular trend that they were trying to see established, and they thought that you might be the right person for it. Leaders are generally non-distractive or shouldn't be distracted by once-off events that don't have trend-shifting implications. The reason why some of you are so burnt out and can't see top from the bottom is because you get distracted by once-off events, and that removes you from the work of focusing on the long-term trend. And so if our job is to shape and to shift a long-term trend of redemptiveness, and strategy is the means through which we figure out how to win at doing so in the context of contestation and confrontation. So that at least answers a little bit of what strategy is, but let's then touch briefly on the idea of what it means to be redemptive. So the word redemption, certainly the context in which we use it, actually means to buy back. But to buy back what? Well, it was used particularly in the context of buying back slaves. Buying back slaves. A person was a slave and we buy them back, and in so doing, we give them freedom. So, and I want to make a touch on, these slides are muddled up, so I want to first touch on this quote by Berger Luck. A thing is what it is called, and it could not be called anything else. And a thing is what it is called, and it could not be called anything else. You all are sitting on things we call chairs. The reason you sat on it, there were multiple things you could have chosen to do when you saw the object that you're sitting on. You could have decided to stand on it. You could have decided to lift it up, put it on your head. Instinctively, you decided to sit on it because of what it is called. But beyond what it is called, because of the meaning that what it is for carries in your mind. A thing is what it is called. And so the work of redemption is when people get labeled as slaves, then what then follows is a particular treatment of those people in a particular way. The denial of certain rights and privileges. More importantly, what starts to happen is that they get treated or they get seen in a way that God does us. And so the work of redemption is not just about buying back. That's the easy part. The work of redemption is about doing so, and in so doing, according to a new name, a new function, and a new destiny. That's what redemption is about. So redemptive work is not just about being able to go and give people who are cold on a Friday morning soup. It's good work, not saying it's not good work. It just can't call it redemption, not by this definition, because as long as after that transaction is done, they continue to remain, or they remain the poor, they remain the hungry and the homeless, they remain the oppressed. We haven't changed their name. And because we haven't changed their name, we haven't changed the meaning attached to their lives. So they will continue to be treated with scorn. They will continue to be chased away from every place that they try to lay their heads. They will continue to be treated in a particular way because of the names that circumstances have attached to them. And then ultimately what that does is it sets the trajectory of their life outcomes and eventually their destiny. So when we speak about redemption, we're speaking not simply about the act of doing good. We're speaking about the transformative work of being able to buy people back their freedom. And in so doing, for them to be called by a new name, for them to have a new function, and for them to eventually have a new destiny. So I guess that then places a particular challenge to all of us to say, if what we have been referring to as redemptive, really redemptive? Because here's the other thing that it does, is that the moment you buy back a slave, they become equal to you. They are a free man or woman, just like you. And quite often I see us in our redemptive endeavors saying we're doing something, but yet it does not change the power relationship between me and the person that I'm supposedly doing the redemptive work on behalf of. Redemption disrupts power relationships. And in our context, it disrupts the power of oppression over the lives of people. Oppression by circumstances, oppression by other people, oppression by the elements. The role of redemption is to disrupt the oppressive power over the lives of people, to give them a new name, to give them a new function, and then to give them a new destiny. So, we now understand what strategy is, we now understand what redemption is. How do we bring these ideas together? This idea of a debtor strategy, and why is it important to have a debtor strategy? So, I'm using these slides more than I thought I would. So I clearly. Why does redemptive work require strategy? Well, what we've come to understand is that, first of all, we're in conflict, we're at war. There's a war for the dominance of particular ideas in the world. And the ideas that lose get relegated to being folklore and folk tales. They have no effect in the affairs of the living. They become aspirational, they become things that inspire us, they become the types of things we would go into buildings on a Sunday about, clap and sing, and then go and live contrary to them. They get relegated to that pile. I find the idea of church quite provocative to my spirit, at least in the ways that we do it. Because I often wonder, this is the most potent message in the world. The most potent message in the world. If the majority of South Africans, for instance, are going into buildings on a Sunday most of the time and then are having this potent message conveyed to them, then what should be happening is that Monday should be a bloodbath on the stock exchange. It should be madness. Every Friday we should be pulling our assets out of the stock market, holding them in cash and waiting for the Christians to settle down because they've just been infected with a new idea from God. That's the potency of this message, at least as far as I see it. It's a very potent message. It's a message that isn't just meant to inspire and entertain. It's meant to fundamentally transform our ways of being. And yet on Monday, life continues like nothing happened on Sunday. We don't all of a sudden kill our assets out of the stock market to allow for things to settle down on Monday. The Christians had been doing that thing again. Let's wait for it to settle down and then we will. Donald Trump announces tariffs. And all of a sudden people pull their assets out of the stock market, because when Donald Trump speaks, things shift. And I don't know about you, but I think the message of the gospel carries a little bit more potency than even his message. So that's an aside. I really struggle with how we doing this church thing when Monday doesn't become an absolute confusion in the world. But anyway, why does the work of redemption require strategy? We've understood that there's an idea, is in conflict with dominant ideas. It's in conflict and it seeks to, it's fighting for dominance. And we understand that if it doesn't win, we see war is a high stakes affair. In war, there are only 4 possible outcomes, depending on which side you're on. There's compromise, there's surrender, there's annihilation, or there's victory. You don't get to just muddle around with war. You know what I mean? It's just like, well, what are you going to do this morning? Yeah, I'm just going to go to that war again, spend 8 hours, then I'll be back. Expect me in time for dinner. You don't get to do that with war. High stakes. There's a resource on the line that cannot be regenerated, the life of human beings. High stakes. And so there are lives at stake here, and when we're at great conflict about trying to advance this idea about how those lives should be lived. So we've understood that. We've also understood that our idea is not particularly dominant at the moment. The world doesn't show it. Our idea is not dominant, and our idea conflicts with all the alternative ideas, and therefore we need to then take up battle, take up arms. But the other reason we need to go into war is because the implications of our losses are generational. There's a particular pattern of outcomes that persists unless we win the war. So the work of redemption, then, we can't just take it as simply, well, if we lose or if we win, it's okay. If we lose, it has generational implications. And here's where, and I know you probably have ideas about what type of generational implications I have in mind, but actually, here's the most adverse generational implication that it has. As long as the ideas of redemption remain in the category of folk tale and fairy tales and so on, and as long as they fail to have effect in the lived reality of human beings, it means that your children and your grandchildren will never get to see the manifestation of this thing that you keep talking about. It will be an idea like any other idea, but there will be no physical point of reference for it. And so what will happen is that over time, even amongst our families, this idea will become something that my parents used to talk about, but something that I've never actually seen in real life. Those are the generational implications of us losing at this war. And so we have to be strategic about it. We're not simply going to win the war or simply have the alternative ideas surrendered to us. We're going to have to win. We're going to have to fight. And I think the kicker in all of that is that, if you think about how many of you have ever embarked on a coup d'etat? Any of you? None of you. Disappointing. During a coup, there are a few things, just as far as the coup d'etat manual goes, there's a few things you do first. You take over the capital, there's a politician, you hear what the politician said. Even before I said you take over the union buildings, he said you take over the radio station. And that's true. You go and take over the primary means of disseminating ideas. Now, I'd like you to reflect on what the primary means of disseminating ideas today are, and who owns them, and what ideas inform their worldview. We're losing. We don't own the platforms for the dissemination of this idea of redemptiveness. It's not a particularly compelling idea on the surface of it, and we're losing. And we're losing generationally. But I also want to touch on South Africa in particular, because I think we have a particular challenge that we need to confront. You all know that picture. The story in South Africa is quite dire for this idea of redemptiveness. Our issue in South Africa is not just poverty. I actually think poverty is the least of our issues amongst the big issues. Why? Because there's poverty everywhere. That's not unique to South Africa. Our issue is that you've got poverty, but that is attached to inequality. The highest rates of inequality in the world. And so that doesn't set us up well for a stable country at peace, when we've got such high disparities between the rich and the poor. But it gets worse, is that this pattern/trend of poverty is distributed along racial lines. That's the greatest indictment on South Africa, is that this particular, not only does poverty persist, but that the patterning of its racialized distribution continues to persist. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because that's not the way God intended it to be. You go to Revelations and you look at God's idea of heaven. It is a place of many nations, tribes, of tongues. It was never meant to be this way. This is a result of particular ideologies that gain dominance, and they're able to set up a trend that persists even to this day. It was never meant to be this way. And this is where it gets particularly painful. That then at some stage, because the church is a primary vehicle, especially in those days, was a primary vehicle for the dissemination of ideas, the church got captured. And while that is regrettable in its own way, the problem is that the authenticity of its witness then was also compromised. And where it is really painful is that we continue to perpetuate patterns of gathering that have that racialized pattern to them. That's the challenge that we have in South Africa in particular. The World Bank did a study and found that inequality in South Africa can be explained, 41% of inequality can be explained purely by race. Educational differentials are coming down as a primary determinants of equality. Demographic determinants are coming down. The primary determinant is race. Now, we know that it's not by accident, right? The reason why this pattern perpetuates along racial lines in a South African context is not by accident. It's because there was a particular idea once upon a time, and that idea gained dominance and then came into effect in shaping the lives of the present and future generations. If we want for people to live redeemed lives, we have to brace the back of that particular pattern, that particular trend. Otherwise, what will happen is we will continue to have strife between us as races. Our children will not know peace amongst themselves as different races. They will never get to experience this idea of many tribes, tongue, and nation. And so we will continue to perpetuate patterns that were not founded because of how God wanted it to be, but because of the ideas of man, ideas that put labels of black and white of people, and they put meaning to what it means to be black or a woman, and then determine the destiny of particular people. That's our challenge. That's our generational mission. And that is why we need a strategy for that, because it persists in spite of all our good intentions. How many of you here are Man United fans? Commiserations. Do you think that Man United players wake up on any day, look themselves in the mirror before they go to the stadium and say, I can't wait to lose? But they feel like it sometimes. But do you think that any of them look themselves in the mirror and say, I can't wait to lose? In spite of their best intentions, they lose. In spite of having some of the best resources, they lose. Now let's bring it closer to home. Do any of you wake up in the morning, look yourselves in the mirror and say, I can't wait to make the problems of race in this country worse? Any of you? Not even one? Isn't it odd that I could probably go into many rooms and ask the same question and no one would put their hands up, and yet the problem persists? And I'm always to believe that it doesn't persist because there are nefarious people who, because there might be a few of them, but the majority of us actually have good intentions, and yet in spite of our good intentions, these problems persist. So the work of redemptive strategy then can't be simply to say to go and do good. It has to be about disrupting the pattern and the trend, changing it and eliminating it. It can't be about making poverty more comfortable. It has to be about eliminating poverty. It can't be about moving people in Kaija from shacks into four-room houses while they still consider us as the wealthy. It has to be about breaking the back of the power relationship that exists between us and them. That's why we need a strategy. And lastly, we need a strategy because we're losing. Because if you look at the trend now, the redemptive way of life is losing. Let's bring it back into the South Africa context. What are we up against? Well, we're up against a couple of things. We're up against the mindsets of the oppressed and the oppressors, if there's such a category. We're up against those. I used to be in politics. Once upon a time, we go in and we're campaigning, and I used to be the national organizer, what we call field director. We go into a community, and a guy comes up to me and he says, so what are you promising us? What are you promising me? So I say to him, as part of the party script and as what we really believe, we don't want to make promises because for too long politicians have made empty promises. They have not kept them. We think that is disrespectful to you. We're not going to make empty promises. We want you to vote us in on the basis of our capability and integrity so that we can go in, see what's possible, and make sure that we make South Africa better. Great argument. He listens to me. We walk a little bit and then he says, okay, but just lie to me a little bit. He's come to understand the game. You lie to me, I assess you on the quality of your lie, and I give you my vote. That's the game you play here. You're now coming up with a different thing here that I can't relate to. So we're up against the mindset of those who are both oppressed, but also those that perpetuate these things. We're up against an economy that is not necessarily growing. We're up against the failings of government. We're up against the fact that this idea of equality is not a dominantly held one. We're up against the apathy of those that believe in it. So we're up against a lot. And that is why we need a strategy, because those things aren't simply going to fall in place. We need a strategy to figure out how we win. And so let's look quickly, as I need to wrap up, let's look quickly at the architecture of redemptive strategy by going back to that burning bush meeting. God starts out and he says, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. Specific reference to people. Redemptive strategy does not start with, I have surely seen my bank balance and I think I should double it. I have surely seen our market share and I think we should expand. I have surely seen my people who are in Egypt. So it also doesn't speak of generalizations. The poor. I have seen my people who are in Egypt. But what have I seen about them? I have seen their oppression. Are we the type of people who have gotten comfortable with blinding ourselves to the oppression that people live under? Or are we willing to see the oppression that God's people are living under? I'm speaking to myself as I land in Cape Town and I see all the hill shacks. Do I see them? Or do I simply gloss over them? Am I willing to see the oppression of God's people? God sets out a redemptive strategy here, and it starts with, I have seen the oppression. I had not first come up with a plan and an idea of what I'm going to do. First, I have seen the oppression. I have heard they cried. Not only have I seen, but I've heard they cry. I know their sorrows. How much time do we take to not simply get taken up by ideas, but to see, to hear, and to know? That's the premise on redemptive strategy. You can't do redemptive strategy at arm's length. You can't do redemptive strategy in a boardroom where we're looking at numbers and not people. Who are the people that are in the heart of your redemptive strategy? The second thing he says, I'm going to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Redemptive strategy, we often speak, at least in church circles, it's about the things we want to create. It's never about the things we want to destroy. Before God speaks about the promised land, he first speaks about, I need to deliver my people. I need to get them out of this oppressive relationship. Part of what constrains us and our ability to achieve that is we are beneficiaries of the very systems that maintain the oppression of people. I'm talking about you and me. Cape Town doesn't get to exist the way it does if Khayelitsha and Langa, the Cape Flats, don't exist the way that they are. That's a sad reality of it. We travel to Europe and so on, and it's such a big joke. No, we emigrated to Europe. We don't have help here. and you're chakra guarded. You don't have help here. It's such a foreign concept to have help. The only way we're able to have help in all of our others is because somebody must be willing to live in a shack or in a back room or something, Ilanda or Kairija, so on, must be willing to earn just enough to be able to live there, to be able to travel to work and back, and to sustain the survival that they need to sustain. You don't get a Cape Town like this without a Kairija like that. So part of what then drives the assistance is the fact that our strategies, often when we speak of redemptive strategies, don't first start with, I've heard them and I'm going to release them from the oppression. Before I start to talk about what I'm going to create, I'm going to release them. I'm going to move them, and then I'm going to settle them in a better place. We are often so absorbed with a better place that we forget that we need to release first. And so the framework for redemptive strategy is one that is about seeing, is about hearing, is about knowing, is about releasing, is about moving, and then is about settling in a better place. God describes that as a land with milk and honey. What is our aspiration? Or are we simply just going to focus on what we're going to do with our assets and what we wanted to achieve? And so as I wrap up, because the guys at the back are harassing me, maybe let me share just some quick thoughts on why I think we're losing. Some of them I've touched on. First, we want to create without destroying. We want to create a new future without destroying what perpetuates the old. Because we benefit from the Lord. Our lives are set up around the old. Because winning is optional rather than an obligation for us. That's why we use it. It's optional. Whether we win or not, it doesn't matter. It's not really war for us. It's entertainment. Whether we win or lose means nothing to us. We fail to appreciate it for what it is, that it's a contestation and it's a confrontation, and that we have to fight. The ideas that we have aren't simply going to be accepted because we are nice people. Ask the gentleman at Parliament who is about to leave. Ask him about the ideas. When I went in politics, I thought, on arrival, I get there, I think, things are going to change because I'm here. Me and my good intentions. No, the politics is not the way it is because you're missing from it. It's the way it is because it operates on a system of incentives that have benefited people for ages, regardless of which party they're in, and that those are not going to change because you've arrived. You're going to have to fight. You're going to have to confront. You're going to have to contest. Clashing imperatives are another one. When you want two things that can't be true at the same time. And because of that, you reach a compromise that results in failure to optimize NO. So for instance, there's a particular way, and there's a particular level of wealth you want to achieve, but at the same time, there's also a particular level of redemptiveness you want to achieve. For you to achieve optimal redemptiveness, you might have to sacrifice your wealth, and you're not willing to sacrifice your wealth, so you end up somewhere in the middle, donating to the soup kitchen. And so what that does is it gives you at least the feeling of doing something, but doesn't disrupt the long-term trend for the existence of soup kitchens. We assume that our good intentions are enough. Our objectives tend to be about making poverty more comfortable rather than the elimination of it. And maybe most importantly is, I went to end off with this quote that says that the quality of the intervention is always subject to the interior condition of the intervener. The quality of the intervention is always subject to the interior condition of the intervener. I'd like to leave you all, good people of the Business Code community, with the thought that maybe even before we go out and try and redeem, we ourselves need protection. We had the most potent, powerful message. We have all of the capability. We went to all the schools and have all the knowledge that they have, whoever they is. The problem must be us. Moses, after God has spelled out this great plan, what's the first words that Moses utters? But. And I can't speak. I lack credibility. God was clear about the plan and the means. The problem was Moses. And so I'd like to challenge you, I'd like to challenge me, I'd like to challenge all of us. What is our interior condition? Are we fit for the purpose of driving redemption? Maybe that's where our strategies need to start. Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you all the best as we change the world for real this time.